Atlantis is situated about an hour outside of Cape Town, and around 250,000 people live in the town. Unfortunately, unemployment is stubbornly high, but the creation of this factory will lead towards job creation and the transfer of skills. I spoke with the Minister of Economic Development, Ebrahim Patel.
Hisense is a global producer of electronic goods. It's a Chinese-based company, and today we officially opened this factory in Atlantis that is immediately creating 300 jobs, and by the end of this year employment would have grown to 600 jobs. Now for us, what is significant about this is it supports our efforts to re-industrialize the South African economy, to root it in manufacturing, in mining and in agriculture. Over the last 2 decades, as we opened our markets to the world, we found that we lost significant parts of our industrial capacity. That a major industrial producer like China sees advantage to locating here, to producing here, to manufacturing goods, not only for South Africa but for other markets too, is very, very significant. It shows us that there is indeed a bright opportunity for South Africa as a major industrial power on the African continent.
Minister, if we look at South Africa's current economic condition, we saw very weak growth out of the first quarter. The rand took a big hit. What is your department's view and your vision going forward? You mentioned that there will be a 4 trillion rand investment over the number of years. Can you maybe spell out what this will entail?
Let me start with the economic climate. Our vision is long term. We've got to be able to step up the structural rate of growth, and that means we've got to address things like the gaps in skills and the gaps in infrastructure. So a lot of our effort as government goes there. The swings in any quarter, we need to take note of it, but they're not a fundamental driver of our economic policy. The fundamental driver must be how to make the economy more competitive, more inclusive, and more job creating. So when we analyze what are some of the constraints to growth, infrastructure features very highly. The ability of companies to move goods from factory to port and sell it abroad. The ability of companies to plan on having a steady and reliable flow of energy, to have water, to have hospitals and schools for the workforce. Those are the kind of considerations that long-term investors look at. And so over the next decade and a half, we're stepping up the pace of infrastructure. By the time this administration concludes its mandate, in about April next year, over the 5 years of its mandate, we would have spent about 1 trillion rand on infrastructure. That is an enormous amount of money that we're investing in our economic future, in ensuring there's the physical basis for long-term growth.
In South Africa, there are a number of great programs on paper. We look at the National Development Plan along with many others, but there seems to be a disparity when it comes to implementing these programs, Minister. What do you believe is the issue here?
I think we've got 2 challenges that we've got to address. The one is the reality of a skills base that we need to rapidly improve to ensure that we have a capable cadre of civil servants, of people who can ensure that in fact the decisions of national authorities are implemented. It starts at a very basic level, that you need a teaching corps that actually is at work teaching on time. But it goes beyond that. It means high-level skills in planning the infrastructure build program, supporting the industrialization efforts of the private sector. All of these are areas that we need to improve. But on the other hand, we have a perception challenge. We in fact do get many things right. When the new growth path was adopted in 2010, it envisaged a much greater capacity of the economy to create jobs. Since then, 600,000 new jobs have been created. On industry, it says look south, look at expanding trade with the rest of the African continent. Today, Ford Ranger bakkies that are produced in Pretoria are sold not only in South Africa, but in more than 100 countries. 1 out of 5 Ranger bakkies, Ford Ranger bakkies, is sold elsewhere on the African continent. So these are success stories that we've got to bank whilst addressing some of the structural challenges to long-term growth.
Minister, we are here today at the Hisense factory launch, which is a Chinese corporation. Turning now towards Africa and China relations, and I'm going to quote the governor of the Nigerian Reserve Bank, who says that Africa must shake off its romantic view of China and accept Beijing as a competitor as much as a partner and capable of the same exploitative practices as the old colonial powers. That is quite a strong statement made by the Nigeria's Reserve Bank governor. What is your view looking at Africa and China's relations?
You know, there's an old saying that nations have no permanent friends, they have only permanent interests. And our interest right now is to industrialize the continent, to improve the living conditions of our people, and to increasingly trade more with each other, with other African countries. China represents a big opportunity for us because on the one hand, it has enormous reserves of savings that can be reinvested on the African continent, and on the other hand, it's also a large market for goods. But we've got to get that relationship right. Ultimately, it is not China that will get the relationship right for Africa. It is Africa that must get that relationship right. Instead of us being a continent of consumers, buying televisions and fridges from elsewhere, we have to produce them. We have to produce them here, we have to sell them to each other. And today's factory represents that strategic shift in how we conceive of our relationship with China. In 2010, President Zuma led a team of cabinet ministers to Beijing to sign the Beijing Declaration, which is a comprehensive strategic partnership between South Africa and China. And in that document, we recognized the unbalanced nature of our trade. Yes, trade was growing very, very significantly, but we were selling raw materials and China was selling finished goods. And the Beijing Declaration committed to a more balanced trade profile, including development of value-added manufacturing products. Now it's up to us to roll up our sleeves, to get our Industrial Development Corporation, whatever the equivalent may be, out there, attract foreign investors, bring in local know-how, facilitate the investment, create a climate in which companies can see the capacity to have a decent return, in which workers can see a future for themselves in the success of that company. That's what we're doing. So Africa's challenge is not to cut itself off. And yes, we must not be romantic about any of our relationships, but they are opportunities as much as they are threats. Yes, China, the United States, Japan, Germany, the United Kingdom, India, they are competitors, but they are also potential markets for our goods. They're also potential sources of investment. So it's the ability to see the opportunity and with focus and a great deal of discipline to apply ourselves to that opportunity. That's what makes a successful nation. That's what makes a winning economy.
Minister, you touched on markets, and I want to look at South Africa's involvement in the BRICS nations. If we look at South Africa's population, market size, and our GDP growth rates which seem to be struggling, do you deserve that South Africa deserves to be a part of BRICS? Why not Nigeria, Minister?
Isn't it a wonderful achievement that there is an African country that is part of BRICS? Is this not something that Egyptians and Ghanaians and Kenyans and Nigerians and South Africans should jointly celebrate? You know, Thomas, what we did. South Africa hosted the recent BRICS summit. And we made a proposal, President Zuma made a proposal that was unusual. He said to his counterparts in the other 4 BRICS countries that he'd like to propose that they stay an extra bit of time in South Africa, and that he invites heads of state and government across the continent for an engagement with BRICS on infrastructure, on industrialization, on development. So we're using our membership of BRICS not only for the benefit of South Africa, but also for the continent. We do so as an act of solidarity because we are Africans, and South Africa's democracy benefited very greatly from the contribution of giants in our continent like Nigeria. But at the same time, we also do it out of economic interest, that South Africa's long-term growth can only be sustained and increased if Africa grows significantly. The success of other African nations is a positive thing for the South African economy. Right now, as we speak, more than 90,000 manufacturing jobs are solely dependent on exports to the rest of the African continent. Today I told the story of televisions. 5 years ago we were a very large importer of TV sets. Today we have recovered manufacturing capability in televisions, not only in this factory that we opened today, but also in the production of Samsung television sets in the Eastern Cape, Sony sets here in Atlantis, and LG sets in Gauteng. And you know what? We're now exporting the stuff elsewhere in the world, but particularly to other African countries. So when Nigeria grows, or when Kenya grows, it's good for South Africa. And so we want the rest of Africa to grow as fast as possible, as inclusively as possible.